right, Thursday is going to be a lab in here. Today I want to go over for the first hour or so Chapter 6 in the book. And after we go through Chapter 6 and what we're going to do, and if John wants to be mic'd up, we can do that, or we can do it any way you want. But we're going to try to see if we can hook. Everybody's going to get one of the tablets, and you're all going to hook them up because the game in Chapter 6, this Canon game, you can run it for about a minute or two under the emulator, then it just goes to hell and it doesn't work. And they even say on here, because of the way that games are set up, they don't run very well on the emulator. It says it throughout here in the chapter. So I want to go over a couple of the things that are in the chapter, and then it'll be lab, and again it'll be lab all next week. You lab all next week in here, and that's probably about it though. So I'm on page 182. It says, create a simple game that's easy to code and fun to play. You can draw your own conclusions on that. Create a custom surface view class for displaying the game's graphics from a separate thread of execution. This is really important because it's a simple game, all right? And I'll show it to you rather than running it because, like I said, I don't want to just screw things up. But just so if you haven't seen it already, it's going to look like this. All right, you got a thing over here. I'm not very artistic. That's a cannon. Okay, and you've got a thing that keeps going up and down here. It's like a kind of a metal thing. It's called the blocker. And then over here, you've got a thing that's broken up into 7 different regions. And what you try to do is you try to shoot each one of these regions. And every time you shoot one of them, you gain time. And every time you hit that blocker, this is moving and this is moving. So every time you hit the blocker, you take time away from you. Every time you miss the blocker and hit one of these, you add time. Does that make sense? And it figures out how many shots you took and your percentage and the like. But the thing is, when you think about this stuff is constantly being drawn and redrawn, and it has to basically happen in real time. Does that make sense? So if I shoot this one out, that's got to be gone. All right, that's what they're talking about. And what the author says here is, use this surface view class for displaying the graphics from a separate thread of execution. Because if everything you did was from the main execution of the program being in a loop, it would slow it down so much you wouldn't even be able to play. It wouldn't be any fun. All right, so we'll talk about that. Draw graphics using paints and the canvas. Override the view's on touch event to fire the cannonball. And the idea is it'll fire it from anywhere you are on the screen. You can move it around, etc., and it'll make more sense when you actually can start playing it. Perform simple collision detection. All right, we'll get to that in just a little bit. Add sound. This is the first time there is sound in here. So the sound, when you hit these things, it sounds like broken glass. When you hit that, it sounds kind of like a clunk. That kind of an idea. All right, and they'll talk about a little bit how to use sound. Then finally, override fragment lifecycle methods using on-pause and on-destroy. And one of the things that the author gets to in this chapter is that anything that happens in the life cycle of an app, if you use fragments, okay, we talked a little bit about fragments in the last chapter, but if you use fragments, they're going to have the same life cycle. So if you've got an on-create in your app, and your app has got a fragment in it, that fragment will also have an on-create. That kind of an idea. And again, you're going to hear this stuff. It's kind of really, for lack of better words, it's sort of throughout the chapter. Not a real long chapter, so hopefully we can get done with it by around, like I said, around 2 o'clock. So they explain the game. I just explained it to you, so I'm not going to show you that. I will try to show you this. We'll see if it works now. Let's see. If you care, I did go back during the time that we had before this class started. There is now a 224-2015 fixed folder out there for the 164 class. And as far as I can tell, I fixed the problem that we had with the quotes, all right, in the OOP stuff, and I added, so what's in there is there's now procedural with OOP. So I added all that during the break. So all that's in there. Is it perfect? No. Are there mistakes? Probably. But by and large, it works. So just so you know that stuff is in there. Yeah, and I made it big on purpose. I'm not going to take out the sound because then it'll screw it up for the taping, so you really won't hear it. But I am going to see if I can run this. And again, I forgot, I was literally sitting there playing it, and I played it 2 or 3 times, and all of a sudden I thought, this isn't working very well. And then I remembered, oh, that's right. They said, don't play it on the emulator. And then after a while, it just, you could shoot at it, you could hit the thing dead on, and nothing would happen. You wouldn't get any sound, you wouldn't get anything. It would look like it was, for lack of better words, going right through it. Now, what's the best thing to do here? Just okay? Okay. So there it is. Notice when I shoot. That's interesting. I don't know how to shoot it from here. I thought I just had to press that. Well, you can see what happens. That wasn't a very good example. Oh, there. Okay. All right, reset game. Now that's what it was. Okay. All right, ready, go. It's already going to hell. I'm trying to shoot and nothing's happening. See, game isn't responding. So it didn't take very long. All right. Yeah, I lose. There you go. Yes. Whatever one I think it was number 1 that you gave me. Yeah, we'll look at that in a little bit. All right. No, I'd like to have it working on everybody's by the end of the period. All right, that's one of the goals for today. All right, so he explains the game then on the bottom of page 183, shows it to you on 184, so you sort of saw it. All right, talks about the alerts that come up. The one that says, as it says, one of them says you win and the number of shots and the total time. Another one, if you didn't win. The idea is I think you get 10 seconds. And again, I believe that every time you hit one of these, the 7 things that are on here, you add 3 seconds. So if you hit 6 of them and you didn't hit this blocker once, you'd have like 28 seconds. All right, and he did purposely set it up so if you wanted to, he made it a very generic program. So if you wanted to do different stages, for example, maybe you could start it out, and when the first time you went through there were only 2 or 3 of them. See what I mean? To make it easier. Then once you get that, you could make it go up exponentially or any way you wanted to. All right, so it purposely was written like that. All right, as far as the technologies, as it says, you can create a custom view by extending the class view or one of its subclasses. So there are several different views in here. Okay, so if we go back and we take a look, no, I'm not going to run it again, but if we bring it up in here, you'll notice there's Canon game fragment, there's Canon view, there's line.java, and there's main activity.java. All right. Most of the programs we've done thus far, everything has been in main activity. That's all of main activity right there. That's the whole thing. You see there's not much in there. There's not much in here either in this line one. All right. Literally, it's just setting up a couple points so you can basically start drawing a line. Here's the Canon view. A lot of code in there. But when you start to break it down, yeah, it's a lot of code, but there are a lot of variables in there, and what you have to be doing is kind of be figuring out all the time where you are on the screen. All right, when you point the cannon, which direction to go to, etc. That's what a lot of this whole program is. And this is the Canon game fragment. Again, not really a whole lot of code in there, about 50 lines or so. All right. Now, we talked a little bit about this also in the last chapter. You're going to see in here in the res raw folder. All right, so if we go into res, someplace in here is the raw folder, and if you look in there, those are the sounds. The blocker being hit, the cannon firing, and the target being hit. And the recommendation is that is, again, where you put all of your music and all of your sounds, etc. Audio and video go into that raw folder. So in other words, any binary type of data would go in there. Notice, there are 6 activity lifecycle methods that have corresponding fragment methods: on create, on start, on resume, on pause, on stop, and on destroy. So in other words, if you call any of those in main activity, bless you, and you have a fragment, it's going to be called in there also. Now hopefully by now some of the stuff that's in here makes sense to you. Alright, I've actually gone out, you may or may not remember, but shown where he has shown it, and I've gone out to developer.android.com too, out into the reference page where they show you the entire life cycle of an app. And there's a similar one for the life cycle of a fragment. But by now, things like on pause, on stop, those should make sense to you when you're running an app as far as what's happening. All right. Again, you're running an app and the phone rings. Is it gonna? So you're running it on your phone and the phone rings. Is it automatically going to stop, or is it going to pause? It depends on a lot of different things. It depends on how you wrote it, or if you got something, you took it off an app store, how it's set up. All right. So he explains what most of these are in here. These are the 2 right here. So that's the activity life cycle, and that's specific to fragments. All right. And again, like I said, yeah, I think it's pretty well done. Overriding the view method on touch. Well, you want to set this thing up. Again, it's funny when he plays it, as opposed to the way I did it. He's got like a little stylus pen almost, and he uses that when he's doing it on the tape. All right, and I don't know if it's a stylus, if it's just literally, it actually could be a magic marker or something. I can't tell from what he shows, but this is a game he's much better at it than he was at the flight quiz in the last chapter. Already talked a little bit then about the sound pool and the audio manager. Notice frame-by-frame animation with thread, surface view, and surface holder. Yesterday, Steve Helsell, and most of you remember Steve from last year, Steve's been in and out. He's had a bunch of part-time jobs. All right, he can't seem to find the right place for him to be into. Either there's not a match where he hasn't wanted to go to a place, or they haven't wanted him, or he's been there and it's been part-time work type of thing. But yesterday he sent me an email, and he said, I'm trying to keep my skills fresh, and I keep creating different kinds of applications, not apps, but different Java applications, different C# applications. And so when I go in for interviews, I've got something to show them. And he said, I'm back to where I want to do something with Java. Can you just give me a suggestion? And I wrote back, how about a non-Android, but try to write yourself a game in Java. All right, and I know he's a gamer, so that kind of piqued him. And he wrote back, oh, that sounds really good, And I went out there and looked, and there's a lot of stuff out there, as you'd probably guess. I YouTubed it and found some of the stuff that was out there wasn't good. I watched 2 or 3 of them, and a couple of them were pretty good. A couple of them were not very good. But there's a lot of stuff out there. In fact, if you look out there, this is the one. Yeah, it's the real weird writing there. So game programming for beginners. All right, that's one of the things I pushed at them. All right, the collision detection then, as we move up to page 187, as it says, it determines whether the cannon has collided with any of the view's edges, with the blocker, or with a section of the target. In other words, when you think about it, when you're shooting here, what's going to happen? One of 3 things, right? Either you're going to shoot and you're going to hit that blocker that's right there. Again, this thing is going up and down. You're going to hit one of these, or you're going to miss everything, in which case it's going to hit over here. But the idea is, the reason that collision detection on here is important is you can only have one cannonball going at a time. So it has to be able to figure out exactly where it is, and if it's literally still on the screen. You can keep holding down on it, but it's not going to keep firing. I suppose you could build something like that into it, but that's not the way that he set it up. All So he comes in and he starts to build the app then, starting on page 187 and going on to 188. Here's the strings. You'll notice that the strings that he has in here not very big. Here on page 188, that's it. Is everybody cool with this now? With what we're seeing in here? We talked about this last time. All right, where it says, for example, shots fired %1, $sign D. All right, and that the %1 and the %2 are both placeholders. All right, it's very similar to the way it's set up with a printf in the C language. And the $sign D means decimal, and the $sign .1f means floating point 1 decimal place. All right, the rest of the stuff that's in here, hopefully, well, that's the same kind of thing here, but just those all make sense. As it says, the fragment game.xml contains the frame layout that displays the Canon view. So he does at least some of the work that you see in here. He does some of it in XML. All right. So again, when you come in here, he sets it up here and he shows it right here. What's going to happen though, since he's working with fragments, is he's constantly going to be having different things on the screen switching depending on what's going on. All right, and that's what a lot of this program in here is. So he says the game layout contains a frame layout that displays the Canon view. The frame layout is designed to display only one view, in this case, the Canon view. All right, so we create it in there, and there's not really very much in it. All right, we look at the activity main here. Notice we don't have multiple ones. This is, I believe, is only set up to play in portrait mode. All right, but if we look at the activity main, just one of them as opposed to what we had last time. Again, not a lot in here. So he explains that. He talks about adding the sounds. He gives you the sounds. You wouldn't have to use those, of course, but that's the way he does it. Class line to maintain the line's endpoints. All right. And again, there are certain things in here that have to go in a straight line for this to make sense. As far as how the blocker is going and as far as how the game is going. All right. Not so much when you shoot this. I guess you are kind of shooting that in a straight line, depending on how you've got it set up and the way you've got it turned also. But as I've already shown you, and they mentioned this on the top of page 190, a lot of short little stubby types of classes in here. The main activity, as it says, it's the host for the Canon game fragment. The only thing that we do in there is we override the onCreate method. Okay, that's it. And if you remember, there's also an onMenu create. He says, well, we're not even going to use that one in here because there are no menus, so he just removes it. Now, when you remove this, because he removes a method from here, there's stuff that is still being referenced in either the strings file or the manifest, so you got to remove that stuff from there too. All right. Again, all that stuff is mentioned in chapter 2. Bottom of page 190, going on to 191. Again, class Canon game fragment has 4 fragments on create view, as it says. This method is called after the fragment's onCreate method and returns a view containing the fragment's GUI. All right. OnActivity created. Called after the host activity is created, it allows the game's audio volume to be controlled by the device's volume keys. All right, is that important? Well, I suppose, depending on how loud it was when you turned it on, all right, it could be important. On pause, as it says, when the main activity is sent to the background, the Canon game fragments is set to on pause to stop the game loop, and on destroy when you're all done, to release all the resources and whatever you've got left in there. All right, so really when you look at this, he builds this in a fragment, but the stuff that you see here on page 191, much of the stuff that's in here looks very similar to what we've done in the main activity file, or main activity.java file thus far. Now, since this is much more animated than the stuff we've done in the past, you'll notice as he shows you here on the bottom of page 192, as far as the new stuff, notice there's a bunch of stuff in there for graphics. All right, you'll notice he's got a bunch of different constants that are in here. So for instance, target pieces, we've already talked about this. I mentioned this, and he mentions it in here. He says, you know, again, if you wanted to set this up so you could have different stages, you wouldn't necessarily have a constant like that. You'd have a variable that you might set to 2 initially, and once you get through a stage, then you set it to 4 or whatever, however you wanted to do it. The same kind of thing, notice the penalties that he has there. 2-second penalty on a miss, 3-second you add, you know, right, when you have a hit. You could change that any way you wanted to. I suppose you could set it up so if you really set it up for people who didn't know what they were doing, you could set it up that each time you hit something, you can give them 2 or 3 minutes. Kind of silly to do that, but you could. All right. What's kind of cool about something like this, and one of the reasons I wanted to go over this chapter, is I think at least that when you run through a game, first of all, most people who write games, you have a different kind of a mindset than you do when you have a regular app. All right? Because more than anything else, with most games, the idea is to entertain. All right? At least that's the way that I'm looking at it. Whereas with a lot of apps that you buy, you know, the one you're working on with the automobile, that's not to entertain, that's more to inform. So really there's sort of a different mindset that you come across with when you're working on this stuff. Plus, you know, you could bring in 5 developers and ask all 5 to develop this. And I would put money on it that each one of them would do it radically different from the other. All right, again, Dytel has a way of doing things. I'm not saying it's the best way, all right, but they have more or less an intuitive way of doing things and a very headstrong way of doing just about everything that they do. So you'll notice there are a lot of variables in here. I've been trying to impress upon the first year people, I mean, Teresa's in one of those classes, that you have to use good names for your variables. All right. It's not really getting through to everybody, but at least I'm trying. All right. So again, you notice a lot of variables. All right. All right. Constructor. Figure 6.9, as it says here, shows the constructor, and that's on the bottom of page 194 and the top of page 195. When the view is inflated, notice it's called with a context and the attribute set as its arguments. This stuff isn't going to make a whole heck of a lot of sense unless you really go in and read it. I read it. I watched the tape. This tape was 1 hour and 40 minutes, I think. All right, and I watched it. I watched like about half an hour. I took a break. I had another half an hour and took a break, and then I watched the rest of it. All right. And again, if you guys want to go back and watch any of these, just let me know. I can bring them up. I have no problem doing that. All right, he starts talking then about the surface holder here on page 195. As he says, call the surface holder callback to receive the method calls to indicate when the surface is created, updated, and destroyed. As I mentioned, that's the thing, is when you're working with this game, you're constantly going to be making changes to what's on the screen, especially when you hit some of those targets. You've got to make sure that they're removed. All right, and that's what he gets to in here. And in addition to that, you want to make sure that it's set up so that while you're doing that, you're also playing the sounds rather. So the user's got some kind of audio feedback as far as what's going on. All right. We already mentioned the fact that this plays in portrait mode only. He does a lot of different stuff in here. And when you look at this, this is on page 196 in the book. Again, I'm constantly amazed when somebody comes into this program and talks to me, you know, comes in during the summer or whatever and says, you know, I would really want to get a job as a game programmer. That's cool. All right. Can I get those skills out of this program? Well, it's not designed for that, but you'll get skills that would help you to become a game programmer. And that's probably happened maybe a half dozen times since I've been here. And in every time except one, the next thing out of their mouths was, but I don't like math. Seriously. Right? We had a guy who was in here the first year we had the program, and he had hair down to his shoulders on one side, and the other half of his head was shaved. I think it was Jason something, really intelligent guy. And first day of class, when are we going to start programming games? All right. He left after one semester. He got a job as a game programmer. He was really, really a bright guy. But I don't know how well he would have done because he told me he hated math. But he's doing a lot of calculations in here to figure out where he is on the screen, etc. The new game, well, by now that kind of stuff should make sense. You know, you got a new game. Well, what do you got to do? Well, you got to make sure that, you know, all your targets are back. Okay, you probably want to put the cannon in the middle, wherever you want to put the default place for the blocker to be. Any thing that your accumulators that you're figuring out for total shots, etc. All that stuff's got to be reset to 0. Your time's got to be reset to 0, etc. And that's all explained in here. This, to me, is one of the more complex ones on 198, as it says, update positions. You've got to update the on-screen elements' positions and perform simple collision detection. So not only do you have to update everything, but you have to figure out exactly where you are right now. As it says, the new locations of the game elements are calculated based on the elapsed time in milliseconds between the previous and current animation features. Again, you could set this thing up as an example. All right, there's a lot of different ways that you could work with this. There's easing and stuff that you may or may not have heard of. We talked a little bit about this in the jQuery class, whereas you can start something up real fast, have it slow down in the middle, and have it speed up again at the end. Or you can do it in reverse, where it starts slow, goes fast in the middle, and then goes slow at the end. You could do all those different kinds of things in here for different effects for the game. Why would you want to do that? Well, you all know, a lot of times when you play a game, you've got different levels. You could set it up so it went really, really fast all the time, so somebody who was at an expert level would be able to play it better. But again, checking with a cannonball on the left, checking to see whether or not you hit it, updating. It doesn't really pay to go and talk about all this stuff. Again, I think it'll make much more sense in a few minutes when you can see it in action. Method fire cannonball on the bottom of page 201. As the author says right here, when the user first touches the screen, all right, it calls fire cannonball. You should be able to touch anywhere on the screen. Again, does not work as well with an emulator, but it worked fine. I was playing around with it when John hooked it up to the tablet the other day. All right, still wasn't that good at the game, but at least it was easier to play. It was a little bit more intuitive to play it on that kind of a device. Align cannon, same kind of thing. You should be able to take the cannon and point it in the direction you want it to go. And they talk about the point in here again because it fires in a straight line. Might be diagonally straight, up or down or whatever, but it's a straight line. Draw game elements here on page 203. Draws the cannon, draws the cannonball, the blocker, and the target. Okay. It's really, I think, it's worth your time, if you got the time, to sit and read this. Now, am I going to make you do anything? Whatever I have you do out of this chapter will be minor unless you are creating a game. And if you're creating a game, you probably would be doing some of this stuff already. All right. For his project last year, one of the second-year people, he graduated in December, Keegan Bradley. What Keegan did was he went online and found a game that he liked and managed to get the source. It was a pretty simple game. He showed it to me. But then he changed it around. He didn't like the color scheme. He didn't like the way stuff worked when you're supposed to shoot at certain things. He didn't like the way so he changed all that stuff around. All right. So something like a chapter like this would help him. All right. But if Mark's working on his thing for auto loans, no, there's probably not a lot in here that he's going to be able to use. Again, game over dialog. Well, now you want to be able to present all the information to the user. Okay. Stop game when you're all done. Notice there's not much to it, just releasing your resources. They mention here, it says figure 618 implements the surface change, surface created, and surface destroyed methods of this surface holder callback. All right. It says surface changed has an empty body in the app because it's always displayed in portrait orientation. So that would say you're changing from portrait to landscape. All right. Surface created, as it says, it's called when the surface view is created. In other words, when the app first loads or when it resumes from background. All right, it creates and starts the canon thread to begin the game loop. Surface destroyed is what you call when the app terminates. Not really much more to this chapter, I don't think. Using a thread to create the game loop, but again, not much in it. All right. And that's pretty much it. So again, they mention here, this is the bottom of page 210 and going on to page 211, a couple points. To draw on the screen from a separate thread, you use a custom view by extending class surface view. All right, this is pretty heavy stuff. I keep trying to get across to my boss why we need two classes in this. That one just doesn't cut it very well. And you know, it's before when Travis was here, when I said if everybody understands that, can you all shake your head? And you were all doing this except Travis was going like this. That's kind of the feeling I get talking sometimes to the people in charge around here. That either they're hearing, but they're not listening, or they just don't care. All right? And I'm not even saying that to be disrespectful. All right? Some of the decisions that are being made around here are being made for totally political reasons. Sad but true. All right. So in the next chapter, which we'll go over after the break, we'll go over that Doodles application, where it's kind of like a real cheesy little, for lack of a better word, sort of like an Etch-a-Sketch. Doesn't work exactly the same way, but the same kind of stuff. Again, the idea now is take a break. After we get done with the break, then John will try to set everybody up with their tablets and get this to work on it. All right. And lab next week, and then when you come back, it'll be lecture on Chapter 7. The Monday we come back, or the Tuesday, and the Thursday if we need it. Then the following week will be lab. Then Chapter 8, which is on the address book, and that might take a little longer. That's the most complex app in the book. Chapter 9, I'm going to lecture on separately. I'll try to get that done during the break. So we'll probably only have another week or so, a couple weeks, worth of lectures, and the rest of it will be lab for the rest of the semester. And the last thing I was going to tell you, because you're all in the next class, what I was thinking of doing was, we're going to go over Chapter 6 in the iOS class today. It's not a long lecture. We should be able to do that ideally in an hour. But what I was thinking of doing, if you think this would help, is on Thursday showing you the calculator that I built. Would that help in showing you what I did? All right. Now, with that said, I don't want you then to go, oh, wow, this is really good, and just type mine in. That doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense. All right. But thinking that some of you might do it anyway, I'm going to add some stuff to it, and I'm not going to implement everything that's in it. All right? So we'll look at that then on Thursday. So we'll go over Chapter 6 in the next class, and then Thursday we'll look at the calculator that I did. All right? Questions? All right. So let's take a break, and we come back. Then John will hopefully show us how to, everybody will get a tablet, and they're to use. They're not to keep. They're not toys. All right. So we'll do that.